Now, this is a modern edition. You can buy this from various Islamic bookshops, or you can stick with the older edition. And this is this book here, أخبار أبي حنيفة وأصحابه. And this is written by Al-Hussein bin Ali Al-Saymari. You can see the name there. And the date that he passed away is 436, so much more early on. And he was a Hanafi scholar himself. He was a Qadi. He was based in Baghdad. And he's an important source of information for all of us when it comes to early Hanafis. In fact, even Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, in his famous Al-Tarikh al-Baghdad, um, takes from him. Um, and it's an important source for Ibn Abil Wafa, who we are looking at. And he usually gets it through Tarikh al-Baghdad. This book is important. It's worth reading this as well because these books give you insights into the Hanafi mazhab. I'm not going to go into detail about this because it's way beyond what we're trying to do. There's a lot of conversations about his sources, same as his sources in here. There's a lot of debate, a lot of conversations. You can read the introduction, and the author and the tahqiq there will help you. So I just want to point these books were present. They are useful to getting an insight. Now, what do I want to conclude from this before we move on? Well, I think it's fair to say that there were some semi-Hanafis, if you read these books, who had substantial connections with the Hanafi school or the Hanafi circle. Let's call it the Hanafi circle because we're talking about a very much early period in Islamic history, especially Hanafi madhab. Further, given that there was a rapid growth of the Hanafi circle during the 2nd century, when many non-Hanafis, including people who were following hadith, I will call them traditionists from now on, they joined. They joined in. So many of them were muhaddithin, scholars who focus on hadith, but they were also scholars who were part of the Hanafi circle as well. So this is not surprising. So we're not surprised that when we read these books, we now find out that actually they weren't strictly Hanafis. But if we look back in that period of history, we'll see, well, they sat with Hanafi ulama. They sat in the same circles. They must have read the same text. They must have had similar teachers, perhaps even. So it's not surprising that you would find this overlap where people would perhaps mention them as Hanafi ulama for that period of time. That's not something that we should be really surprised at when we do history in this way. But it also shows us something else, that the fact that they are mentioned shows that Hanafi school was gaining prominence. It may be that some of these were included because of that, because of the prominence of the Hanafi school. So it would have been surprising if no echo of the growing influence of the Hanafi circle had been preserved in biographical sources. But since biographical literature is dominated by works written by traditionalists who claim the semi-Hanafis for their own party and who generally dislike the Hanafis, the Hanafi features of the semi-Hanafis were at best played down and worse neglected entirely. So we have it from the other side that there was, as you know, some animosity between the Hanafis and the traditionalists in that period. And so because they saw Hanafism or the school or the circles of Hanafi as somehow in a negative light because the traditionists, muhaddithin, they would play down anyone who might have been seen as a Hanafi. So with more biographies, more reading will make more sense of this. And you're aware, I've shared some resources already with you about the early debates that took place between scholars who were of the Hanafi circle and scholars who were part mostly of the traditional circle, and how early on there was some friction between them. And we can see this in the sources. But over time, those frictions became less prominent. Right. After saying all of this, I want to look at just one place as an example of where the Hanafi madhab um, gained root. So before I do that, I just want to park this for a second and just mention that there are places where Hanafism took root beyond the famous places like Iraq, Kufa, and Basra. So you have Baghdad in Iraq. You have Baghdad, Anbar, and Wasit. These are important places. In the Jazeera, you have Mosul and Raqqa, and then you have Syria, places in Syria, you have places in Egypt, and you also have places in the Maghreb. So I'm not going to go into all of these places because that would take up hours and hours. But I just want to focus on one particular location, which is Kufa, and also Western Iran. So you have Ahwaz, Isfahan, Hamadan, Rai, Qazvin, these places. But I really want to focus on Iraq for our purposes, just to give you a flavor of how these things were happening, because I find these things very, very fascinating. And it also allows you to appreciate, when you're reading scholars of the past, the sort of world that they lived in, and to be cautious about, ascribing titles to them when those titles might not have been something that they ascribe to themselves. Like today, when Muslims ascribe titles to ulama in the recent past, whether that's reform movements in India. So you have the Deobandi movement, the Bareilly movement. You have these movements, and they're all given these titles. The question is, when these founders established their movements, did they consciously seek to identify themselves with the titles that we give them now, or were those titles something that developed later on, or was it because the creed was taking place, or accusations of heresy was taking place, and so the people who were making these accusations or lampooning these accusations were otherizing them, and therefore these identities came about because of that. So that's just something for you to think about. Let's go to Iraq, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so Iraq, Kufa. I want to focus on Kufa, and I want to do what we've just been discussing um, by looking at one specific geographical location. We're going to start in the second century, or the 8th century, if you like, in a common era with Iraq. Now, you've already discussed Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman in previous lectures, who died in 120. And after he passed away, if you remember, I said that the person who took the mantle was Imam Abu Hanifa. So this was Imam Abu Hanifa's legacy. But we must stress this: if you were to go back to Kufa in 120 Hijri, you would not be surprised, or you would be surprised even, to find that there weren't just one circle. There were many circles, many ulama having discussions, discussing many masail, many ahadith, many practices, and one of them might have been Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman. And if you went to Kufa, you would find many, many scholars and students going to different teachers and learning from all of them, just like it would have happened in the Muslim world today, right? That people go there, they sit in Damascus, they sit in this place, they that place, then they go to maybe Istanbul, maybe they go to another place, they travel to different places, and they would learn from different ulama. So in the cities, you would have that as well. And usually a study group was a group of students who sat around a notable scholar, okay? And they looked for legal guidance, and they trusted his judgments, his understanding. Um, so, for example, apart from Imam Abu Hanifa, you would have found Ibn Abi Layla, who we've introduced and we'll come back to as well. And he was someone who also in fiqh used legal reasoning. But you will also find muhaddithin scholars like Sufyan al-Thawri, who would have been there, or Hassan bin Saleh bin Hayy. Um, there were many, many scholars, there were many, many circles there, but the one that survived and the one that's most notably remembered is, of course, the circle of Imam Abu Hanifa. That's the only one that survived, right? Um, and Kufa has a very distinct way, if you compare it to other locations, of how Hanafism spread. Contrary to popular belief, and I'll tell you this, it didn't take root straight away. The Hanafi madhab didn't take root there straight away. The traditionists, the muhaddithin, had a strong foothold there. Now, I don't want to paint this as some sort of fuqaha muhaddithin being antagonistic, but you can see it in the writings of the past. Okay, um, and elsewhere in the other places, Hanafism took root arguably sooner actually than it did in Kufa. Um, So in Kufa, it's worth also remembering that Hanafism was already there. In other words, it wasn't like an incoming legal tradition that achieved dominance over local circles, um, but it gained preponderance and it eventually eliminated others. So it was already part of the ground or the soil of Kufa. Um, if you look at other places where Hanafism came from the outside, for example, you can find usually dates when it entered those places. Sometimes you don't. But in Kufa, you don't really know when Hanafi law actually appeared um, because it kind of had roots already in that location. Um, and it was the Hanafi mazhab as a organic growth in Kufa was a slow organic process. The question really is this: why did Imam Abu Hanifa's circle develop and survive? And we're going to go into that today. We're going to try and explore that in the context of Kufa specifically. We're not looking at other locations, but we're going to look at Kufa to try and get an understanding of why this might be the case. And I hope you will find what we've covered so far useful and what we'll cover in the next few minutes or so useful, inshallah ta'ala. Now, there's a lot of possibilities. And of course, history is sometimes a little bit um, it's not the strongest form of evidence, right, in our usul, but it's all we have to make sense of the past here. Um, Now, I don't want to use kind of like teleological arguments or some sort of argument to say, well, there was something blessed about Imam Abu Hanifa that allowed his madhab to survive. That's true, and many ulama in their discourses, in their popular discourses, will say this, that there was something about Imam Abu Hanifa. You should pray a lot, for example, if he's very pious, or his parents did something. You hear these stories, and that's valid. You can use those. The only challenge with those sort of arguments is you can bring counter arguments. You can say, well, other schools had teachers who were just as pious. So there must be, at least for our investigations here, material causes. Something happened in that period that allowed the Hanafi madhab to develop and survive. And of course, those material causes would have had divine causes. Yani Allah wanted this to happen. Of course, this was the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What I'm saying is we don't want to put too much emphasis on these sort of arguments because they can be quite easily appended by people saying, well, if you're using that argument, this scholar was just as pious. Why didn't his madhab survive? So rather than saying that, you say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this, and this is what Allah wanted. But these are the material causes, these are the asbab through which this particular madhab in that particular time grew into prominence. Um, so one possibility is that some people say that this circle of Imam Abu Hanifa and his teachers and his students, they were special. They had some sort of special status in Kufa already at that point in history in the second century. Um, and that's when the Abbasids were going through centralization, um, it became natural to adopt the Hanafi madhab because of the special status that they had. So it was a natural choice for the Abbasids. And so once they gained favor with the Abbasids, they could gain more authority and then supplant other legal traditions like the one of Ibn Abi Layla and Saudi and others in Kufa. Um, However, there are other ways you can think about this. So that might be a valid argument. Another way to look at it is this particular book here, or this volume here, and it's called Akhbar al-Qudat by Waki Muhammad bin Khalaf bin Hayyan, who passed away, as you can see the date there, 306 Hijri. Um, and he talks about stories of relationship between ulama, between political authorities, which gives us a window into the sort of world that was present there. Um, and when we read it, we see something very interesting taking place. We see that in Kufa, there were two scholars who were very active, indeed very popular. One was the Qadi Ibn Shubruma, who died in 144 Hijri, and of course Ibn Abi Layla, who I've talked about already. And you also have people like Sufyan al-Thawri. And in fact, Ahmad ibn Abi Sulaiman, who we talked about previously, and Imam Abu Hanifa are not mentioned in that period as much as you would think. Um, and before I go into the details, I thought I'd give you a summary. This is a summary that's taken from an academic book, which kind of gives an alternative take on this. And I'll just read it for you, and I can give you a reference later on if you wanted it. Um, so here's a picture of Kufa that emerges from all of this is as follows. During the 2nd or 8th century, and especially in its second half, Hanafism was associated with Murjiism, we'll come to that, and with a loyalty to government. On the other side were the traditionists, the Muhaddithin, who by and large supported the right of the Alids to the caliphate and considered the current ruler a usurper. So there's politics involved here, as there always is. So the Muhaddithin felt that Abbasids shouldn't be in charge. Okay. In addition, the traditionalist doctrine of faith implied that the condemnation of a ruler who misbehaves should not be deferred to the world to come. So this was this idea: someone who does major sins, we leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the muhaddithin was saying, no, we should do something about it in this world. If rulers are immoral, then we should do something about it. So you can see how your particular theology affects your politics, political theology. Really, really important. A lot of people think Aqidah is just some like, random debates taking place in the past and they have no relevance. Your theology, the particular positions you take, have actually real life implications. This is something I wanted to point out. Anyway, let's repeat that again. In addition, the traditionist doctrine of faith implied that the condemnation of a ruler who misbehaves should not be deferred to the world to come. So you don't do what a murji'ah is doing and say, well, we leave it to Allah, right? And consequently, they criticized the authorities openly. So the muhaddithin were more likely to openly attack or say things about the authorities. And the loyalty of the Hanafis in Kufa to the Abbasid government, as it happened over time, as opposed to the unpopularity of this government in traditional circles. So the Muhaddisin didn't really like them and they weren't popular with the leaders. You treat them that way, they'll treat you in a similar way. May have been an important motivation for the Abbasids to sponsor the Hanafis, in spite of the fact that the Hanafi Abu Hanifa circle did not enjoy a great deal of popularity in Kufa. So they weren't very popular, as I mentioned here, but over time, due to changing circumstances, the Hanafis were able to gain a greater foothold. This is the summary of what I'm going to say for the next half an hour. If you want to leave, you can leave. If you want to see the details, you want to see the meat, then you can stay with us, inshallah ta'ala. For the next half an hour or so, I'll just go into some details. But this is the summary. If you've understood this is a theory that can help you to understand how over time in Kufa, the Hanafis gained prominence, as opposed to the traditionalists who had prominence initially, but due to theology, due to political circumstances, the Hanafis were able to get a deeper or root in politics, if you like, in government. We talked about Imam Abu Yusuf earlier, and how that helped them, the state machinery helped them to ensure that the Hanafi madhab was able to spread amongst believers. All right, so this is just, this is really important to bear in mind. And this is by reading texts like the book here, Akhbar al-Qudat, which is written very, very early on. So, for example, we know that the first Hanafi Qazi of the city, Qasim bin Ma'an, was appointed by the Khalif al-Hadi. But most of the appointments before that, during the 5 decades before Al-Qasim, so before the first Hanafi became a jurist, right, was actually at the hands of Ibn Abi Layla, the traditionists. And he actually held that position, the Qadi position, for 20 years, and with another sheikh, another scholar called Sharik bin Abdullah. Um, so if Imam Abu Hanifa and his companions were prominent, you'd find early on in Kufa that many of the judges would have been Hanafi, but that isn't the case. Um, so the fact that Hanafi fuqaha were nominated late in Kufa suggests that there were other legal elements in Kufa who were more powerful to keep the Qadi out of the hands of the Hanafi. Now you can see what I'm doing with this. I'm trying to complicate this narrative and give you more detail, more texture to read history, to read the past. And this is what I try and do myself in my own life when I read things, to read things more in a humanistic light, because they were human beings, and human beings by nature um, compete. They make social groups. If you read sociology, you know that it's in our nature to identify ourselves most with people who are similar to us. And so we don't really have issues with people who are similar to us. People who are different to us, we not only do we differentiate from them, but the reason we differentiate from them is that the difference is clear. And those who are more different from us, the more the differences become clear over time. So this is just human nature. And I met someone. I was with someone today, and they went to a talk and they came home, and they were reading about the end of times. They must have been a sheikh talking about the end of times, and he said, all these fitnas happening, and world's going to come to an end. And I'm always skeptical about these sort of pronouncements about people saying the world's going to come to an end. Nobody really knows when the world's going to come to an end. And if it's any use, if you read history and you read Muslim history, Islamic civilization, there are some wonderful things that have happened in Islamic past, but there are also things that are not so good. And it all comes down to human frailty. We make mistakes. We become like clan-like. We have ta'assub sometimes. We have tamazhub. It happens. And so the quality that we need to bring into our lives is this idea of insaf, of being just, being munsif, being a person who is free of being, or at least minimizes the risk of being influenced by other groups. So this is just, I don't want to say this because we like to look at the world, as we say in English, with rose-tinted glasses. We like to look at the past with rose-tinted glasses as if the past was somehow amazing. At the same time, we kind of look at the present as amazing. Like we have all this technology and access to all of these things, but it might not be much better uh, than the past. The past might have been a better place to live in. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is these things do happen, and competition does happen. Sometimes it can be very, very bloody, and sometimes it can just be quite mundane. So these things do happen in the past as well. So you find that the Hanafis didn't have a strong foothold in in the early part of their history in Kufa in particular. Okay, so we need to look for an explanation of why dominance came about for Imam Abu Hanifa and how it transpired later on that the Abbasids provided support to the Hanafis than to some other Kufan school. I kind of give you the answer already because I didn't want you to get tired of just listening to me rabbiting on. But you kind of get the answer already. But look, we want to trace that journey a little bit. And so let's go back to our Sheikh Imam Abu Yusuf. And if you read sources, you read modern literature, you'll hear this argument that it's because of Imam Abu Yusuf, because of his status in the Abbasid court. He was a major factor in the success of the Hanafis. And this argument might have some weight, that he found a way to the heart of the Khalif Harun al-Rashid, which led to him becoming the first chief judge, Qazi al-Qudat, in the Muslim Empire. Um, and then, Imam Abu Yusuf, because he was in that position of influence, he appointed other Qazis in the empire. Um, and, everybody was appointed with the backing of Imam Abu Yusuf, for example. Um, Now, there's some questions around this because the evidence doesn't seem to follow. Okay, so for example, if you look at Khurasan's you should all visit that place, inshallah ta'ala, or we could all go as a group one day. Um, we find that actually there, the Hanafi madhab spread quicker. In fact, during the lifetime of Abu Hanifa, so in a land that's not the Hanafi heartland, unlike Kufa, not somewhere where it's already indigenous, but where it's being imported, if you like, we find that the Hanafis were able to gain a strong foothold. And this makes sense. Sometimes it happens, as you know, in your communities, your local communities don't accept you because there's too much competition between committee members and mosque people, activists, and everyone. And then you end up moving to a different location, subhanAllah, and you end up getting more currency there because the ground, the environment there is just more favorable to the type of work that you want to do. So I always tell my students and friends to sometimes look further afield. You never know. So Khurasan is an interesting example because the Khurasanis, they already had a theological position which in many ways agreed with the position of the Hanafis. This is the Murji' appeal that they had of faith. So what is this? I haven't mentioned this in detail. So the Murji'ah, what they basically do is they say that we exclude A'mal from the definition of faith, right? And remember, Khurasan is a newly converted place. People have become Muslim recently. And the Murji'ah position doctrine is that if people, we don't do takfir of people who are found wanting in their deeds. Okay, if you become a believer, you're a believer, you're a Muslim, right? And yes, you're supposed to practice, you're supposed to do your salah and your ibadah and your practice of religion. But if someone doesn't, then we withhold making some sort of view upon you. Now that's different, by the way, to saying you reject them. So if someone rejects an article of faith openly and says, I don't believe salah is farz, I don't believe alcohol is haram, I don't believe riba is haram, I don't believe zina is haram, then that's something else. They've openly rejected the faith. It's very different to someone not praying. It's very different to someone taking on riba. It's someone very different to someone drinking alcohol knowing that's haram. So there was this position which was more in affinity with the position of the people that lived in Khurasan and Hanafi Madhab, which was this irja position, and that allowed the school to spread there quickly. That's one reason that's been given. Allah knows best, but this has been often preferred as one reason in that particular location. So I'm just giving you a contrast between Kufa, which had many circles, and initially it had a lot of influence from non-Hanafi ulama, whereas Khurasan, fresh piece of land, new converts, and more palatable for Hanafi domination.